Welcome to the Divine Counsel Worldview Podcast, where we keep finding things, looking for things that are not in the commentaries, right, Mike? As we work our way through Genesis, we are going to handle this time Genesis 35 and 36, where we officially close the story of Esau, and especially his relationship to Jacob. And of course, the story of Joseph will follow right on the tails of that, which is the genealogy of Jacob, it's called, but it's really, of course, the story of his second favorite son, Joseph. We will end with this today, and so I want to introduce it as kind of an introductory thought to get into today's podcast, is shall I call it the handling of Esau by Yahweh. I'm going to recommend, and I think it's pretty easy to find in the text, that Yahweh was not, or that Esau was not a Yahwist, from what I can tell. And so when he is given, quote, the land of Seir by Yahweh, as though it's one of those Genesis 11 stories, where God gives he allots the authority to a created Elohim to be over a land or a territory. I think Esau is one of those stories. At the same time, and I'd just like to get your quick opinion on this, Mike, because it's not often talked about in Divine Counsel discussions, but I think it should be. And it doesn't come as a surprise as I introduce it to you, that when we say that Yahweh allots or divides and gives authority to other Elohim, created beings, to be in charge of lands outside of Israel, what we also find in the story of Scripture is that every now and then Yahweh shows his authority even over that situation. So, and of course, one of our favorites is 1 Kings 18, where Elijah is challenging Melkart, the god of Tyre, Jezebel, right? And he's up there on Mount Carmel, and he's in a land that's basically equidistant between the Jerusalem temple and Tyre itself. And so the question of who controls Carmel may be on the minds of people during this contest between Elijah and the prophets of Baal. And we know from the story that Yahweh silences Baal that day. He silences Melkart. Melkart basically is shown to be a, quote, nothing, that Isaiah will use that idea. And so when we talk about Esau, I just want to throw this idea out here at the beginning, that watch for Yahweh both kind of like a king in an ancient world, where he sets a subordinate in control of a territory, right? One of his viziers or something. But at the same time, he has ultimate control. Yahweh still has ultimate right to get involved and to do things with that land or that king or that god even. So anything there that jumps off the page to you, Mike, as we get going? We're going to do this with Esau. That's where I'm going to end with that today. So I just want to throw that out there as something to watch for.
Well, so two thoughts. I'll give my initial one is that, going back to learning about the DCW, one of the first books I read was from Dr. Daniel Block, his Gods of the Nations book. And one of the things that caught my eye was his own translation of the Septuagint's version of Deuteronomy 32, verse 8 to 9. And he ends it with, "For the portion of Yahweh is his people Jacob, the allotment of his patrimony is Israel." And I had never heard of the word patrimony. And so I immediately looked it up in the dictionary, and I realized it's like inheritance. It is inheritance, but it's a particular expression of inheritance, where it's the inheritance that a father gives to his son or his sons, but he reserves the right that if the sons are disobedient or wicked or bad, or he's displeased with them, he has the right, because he is the father and is a patrimony, he has the right to take back the inheritance. And so I thought the way that Daniel Block did his translation of that Septuagint verse was ingenious, because it basically incorporates this idea that, like, yes, you have been given this inheritance, these people to take care of, to be guardians of, but sort of like anticipation of Psalm 82, if you don't act justly, if you don't treat and take care of these people well, I reserve the right to take these people back.
Good point. Yeah. Psalm 82 even does that.
Yeah. So I love the idea of like, yes, God is going to be doing something with Esau and the people that come out from Esau. The second thought is that, my wife and I lately, we've been mainly because, this is now past the Emmys and whatever else, the award seasons. And we had started watching this highly acclaimed show that was on this channel. And it's called Shogun. And it's basically about feudal Japan in the 19th century. And one of the interesting things is that it shows the relationship between a lord, a regent who controls a portion of land in Japan, and his relationship to his vassals. And the vassals themselves carry so much authority. Like everyone is basically trying to kiss up to this vassal of like, oh, if I treat this person well, if I do this and that, he'll give me more control of this city and this town and wherever. But even the vassal, ultimately, he can't do anything if his lord, his regent, basically steps in and says, I'm going to be taking all your army right now. It's like, excuse me? It's like, yeah, because ultimately they're mine. Not really yours. They're borrowed to taking care of your people in normal times. But right now, I need your army. The vassal can't do anything about it. It's like ultimately there is someone above him that has higher authority and power, and he has to obey. And so it's been a terrific kind of reminder of how really in ancient cultures and civilizations, this concept of a pecking order and hierarchy was so common. And so it's right. Very understandable for going from one culture to another, because there's going to be similarities of this idea. For order and peace to occur, you have to have some sort of hierarchy in order for things to run smoothly.
Right. Now was that the first of two ideas you said you were going to throw out, or
those are both ideas? It was
okay. I was waiting for the second one, but maybe you were on the second one. So.
I was on the second one from
cool.
Just talking about that show. It's just been a very interesting thing to see, it being portrayed almost so accurate. It was like it's done so accurately. I've just been impressed by Asian period dramas lately. It's just been like, this has been helpful just to see the parallels in cultures.
Yeah. Well, good. Yeah. And so as we get into this today, the point that I wrote out to myself, a DCW has as much to say about Yahweh's handling of Esau as his covenantal promise to Jacob, even though he has a covenant with Jacob, and we have that two-way communication between Jacob and Yahweh. Watch for Esau being a man who is still very involved in God's plan for the world. And even though he has been, quote, given to the power of a different deity, probably. All right, let's jump into 35. It's an interesting text, and I'm going to take it verse by verse because it's pretty packed. Then Elohim said to Jacob, no article there. Then Elohim said to Jacob, and I take it to be Yahweh, arise, go to Bethel and dwell there, and make an altar there to Elohim, who appeared to you. It's one of these strange times again where God or an Elohim or Yahweh says, do this and make an altar to, and you would expect him to say me, but he just says Elohim. So I think that's just a standard way where Hebrew grammar can be a little clunky, but he's saying the same thing. Make an altar to me, or actually how the verse reads, make an altar there to the Elohim who appeared, singular verb, to you when you fled from the face of Esau, your brother. Now that's referring back to 28:10. Let me just summarize that. I won't read it all, but back in 28, remember this, in 10 and on, he has this vision. He's running from Esau, and he has this vision of a ladder or a stairway, and up and down that stairway are malachim of Elohim. So God, messenger gods, are going up and down this ladder, which then he later calls a gate of heaven. So he saw this as a portal, as it were, of divine activity on the earth. And then in verse 15, again back in 28, he hears Yahweh say, I will go with you wherever you go. I will be your portable patron deity, as it were, which is very odd for that world, right? And be watching again, as we know, in 48, 15, and 16, Jacob, in his dying breath, will talk about this Elohim / Malach, who was with him wherever he went. And so maybe there's something there again that is going on behind the storyline, where Jacob is being literally led by, following a Malach through life, and that Malach, of course, being an Elohim on duty, as it were, helped him. But we'll get there, of course, in time. Then in 28:20, in that story again of the ladder or the stairway, he makes, in verse 20, he makes this amazing, well, we call it a vow, but it's pretty gutsy, where he says, if you, Yahweh, give me food and clothing, I'll make you my personal deity. It's kind of stunning, because his grandfather Abraham didn't say that, nor did his dad. But Jacob has the guts to say, okay, before I commit to you, El Shaddai, probably is the title he gave him at that time, I want to know that you're going to feed me and clothe me. And so it's almost as though Yahweh says, okay, we're, this covenant, this bet, this deal is on. And that's why I think 35:1 sounds the way it does. So 35:1 to me is where God taps him on the shoulder and says, okay, based on that bet or deal you made with me back in 28:20 about if I'll take care of you, then you'll be my deity. Let's get that settled. And so I want you to go and make an altar there to me. And that's how the story starts. Anything you want to add before I keep moving along, Mike? It's kind of an amazing moment, where God is trying to seal the deal with Jacob, a very, very, very important character in the narrative of Genesis, if not the whole Bible. And we've had him make this deal or this bet, if, then I will. And now God seems to be saying, now's the time. Let's get this settled. So
I think one of the things I have appreciated by going through this, reading through Genesis with you again, is I think one of the things that has come up in my mind is Jacob he's not a perfect analog, but he really is kind of displaying what I would imagine is the journey of a person who's trying to learn what it means to be loyal to Yahweh, right? Bit by bit. It isn't in one sort of grandiose declaration. It's bit by bit. As I go through the years, and then as I get older and I look back on those past years, do I see faithfulness?
Yeah.
And what should my response be in light of that knowledge now? And so I get this sense of him, he sort of treated Yahweh probably well, that's just my family's God. But over time, as he's gotten older, as he's needed more and more help, as he's realized he's not as shrewd as he would like to think he is,
right?
That he's needed the assistance and really the protection and the patronage of this God that his family had declared was their God.
And it's probably more like when, we talk about getting saved today, we would feel uncomfortable if we mean by that I can say something on a Tuesday night that settles my eternal destiny forever, right? That's not how God works. And if there's ever a good example of that kind of loyalty that takes time and, back and forth kind of a thing, it's Jacob. So thank you. That's a good point. In fact, that brings me to verse 2, because if we didn't know what verse 2 would say, we could predict maybe something like verse 2. And here we go. And Jacob said to his household, based on God tapping him on the shoulder, that he wants to settle this finally and once and for all, as it were. And he says to all that were with him, put away the foreign Elohim that are among you. That's a stunner of a verse, right? I mean, all of a sudden, we have Jacob looking up across his family there and seeing backpacks full of probably idols. And so let's keep reading. That are among you. Well, let's mention, by the way, the word foreign there 35 times in the Old Testament. It's just the common word for foreign, nekar, and it's used for Exodus 12:43. You're not going to have a foreigner among you when you do Passover. And then, I'll just list the text, but it's interesting, following the phrase foreign Elohim, Joshua 24:23, Joshua will tell that generation to put them away. Judges 10:16, foreign Elohim are among the people. 1 Samuel 7:3, God is upset. Samuel's upset because of the foreign Elohim among the people. 2 Chronicles 33:15. Look how late that text is, and that phrase occurs again, that foreign Elohim were taken out of the temple. So if there's anything that's going to be at the top of the list when it comes to a storyline of the Old Testament, and again, I have that ringing thought in my head based upon Doreen Virtue's video, where one of the persons said we should only put major ideas in our theology that are talked about a lot in the Bible or something like that. We should major on the majors. Well, there it is to me. If we're not going to major on the concept of foreign Elohim, I don't know what else to do. And so I would say that this will be one of the stories, if not the story of the Old Testament, will be loyalty to the wrong gods. And here is a early story of Jacob looking at his family saying, guys, we need to settle this now. We're not going to have foreign Elohim among us. Those, I'm sure, are pictured as idols. Well, actually, as we continue to read, we'll see what they do.
Ron,
anything you want to add there? Or
yeah, I mean, it's generally right. So as you mentioned that video, I mean, other folks have mentioned similar ideas before, right? And if challenged, typically the route that goes about this, how to explain this is, well, foreign gods or this word is just really a reference to those physical idols. Right, those gods don't really exist. It's just the idols, the physical objects, and that's what people were fascinated with. They were just fascinated with the actual making of these idols and gods, and they're one and the same. And the thought that occurred in my mind is that what's happening is that, especially in our culture, we tend to think of idols, making a car an idol, making a house an idol, something as an idol. And we don't think of an actual deity or some sort of divine being behind it. But that's a different in culture and just understanding of things. Because in this time, those physical idols represented the actual deities, the actual gods. And we, in our modern times, are somehow becoming so fascinated, essentially, with what is the middleman, right? It's like, I go to buy a truck, I don't think of the salesman as Ford. But that's it. Sometimes I get this feeling that we become so fascinated with it's the physical item, it's the physical idol. But we are forgetting that the idol is representing a deity, an entity, and a rival to Yahweh's worship. And so, yes, it's a physical item, but the item represents a bigger issue. And that issue is pointing to a rival God that is desiring the worship of Yahweh's creations.
Right.
And so
thank you.
I think that's just something that has to be clarified, because our fascination or our obsession of dismissing foreign God as just idols or physical objects is us almost equivalently making the mistake of seeing the salesperson at a car dealership as though that person is the actual dealer, like they're Ford,
nice
they're
analogy.
Mazda, they're Toyota. No, they're not.
Yeah, and we have talked about this prior, that in our previous podcasts about the idol itself and how they would pray over it, or you'd take it to a priest and the priest would, quote, open its mouth, and the beneficence, the actual presence even of a deity would, in their mind, enter that piece of wood or stone. And it would thus become a deity in their mind, although if they lost it, they would just make another one. So a lot going on there, but that's all part of their worldview. And I also want to mention, by the way, in verse 2, interesting, it's the only time in the book of Genesis we have this word. Put away the foreign gods that are among you, Jacob says, and purify yourselves. Taher. Only occurrence in Genesis. Now, it's going to be a word used a lot, 93 times Old Testament, 41 times in Leviticus by itself. It means to cleanse, purify, in a ritual sense, yourself. The opposite, of course, is to be unclean, tameh, 160 times. And almost always, by the way, if you look up unclean in the story of Leviticus and such, it's a non-moral offense. It's touching a carcass. It's having a bodily discharge, that kind of stuff. It makes you unclean, tameh. The opposite of that is where a person would cleanse themselves or wait a period of time, 2 days, 7 days, whatever, and you would, quote, cleanse yourself. Notice this is not a moral issue. This is, again, in the story. It's the only time in Genesis that we have anyone on their lips use the word taher, meaning to cleanse themselves. But it shows to me, and again, I'd be happy to get your opinion on this, Mike, because I think this is a DCW issue. To me, it is. When Mike, Dr. Heiser, went through the book of Leviticus in his Naked Bible podcast, he was, I think, giving a divine counsel worldview view of Leviticus. And in other words, I think there is a divine counsel way to read Leviticus, and that is, as a left to right, what would the people of that period think about what is being said? And when you do it that way, you are bound to believe, I believe, that cleansing, and here's my point, cleansing is a vital part of worshiping a deity, because you thought of yourselves literally, notice how the story here is in 35:2, when you take that foreign deity and you're going to throw it away, or what they're going to do is bury it. The cleansing of oneself, even though it's a ritual, is part of the story of getting right with the deity that you want to worship. So here's how I'd say it. To worship a deity in that world, in this world that we're talking about, included making oneself physically presentable. And the reason that's so important is because what we're going to be finding, I think, as a storyline of the Bible, is that you could be a righteous person who is yet unclean. Those are not the same thing. You can be a righteous person who is unclean. So here's the problem, I think, of the book of Acts. This is looking way ahead, but here's why it's important to me. Here's the call of Paul and his gospel. Here is even, I believe, where the atonement of Jesus is going to fit in, that the New Testament church would never have happened if Peter, think of the story there, had not changed his mind about Cornelius, a, quote, righteous and yet unclean man at the same time. That story then that really gets him, here's the first time the word is mentioned in the Bible, and it's curiously saying that this is a cultural phenomenon even of Jacob's world that's pre-Torah. This isn't something that Levitically God, commanded people to think about. This is something that their culture had already come to view as a requisite when it came to worshiping a deity, and that is physical or ritual cleansing. So I throw a lot out there, but I just find it's fascinating that this is where it starts. It starts in the culture of that era, and it'll go from there. Anything you want to add to that?
I think there is a very interesting, one of my friends, and I think, he was on the Ask a Scholar podcast a few months ago, Drew Johnson. And one of his things that he's been focusing on is about rituals and why human beings really at the end of the day, we at times do establish, we need ritual in unofficial and in official ways. And that could just simply be because part of how we are crafted is that there is something needed for us to feel like we are moving from one, new space of time to a next, or from one, sacred space to a common space. Like there's some need to feel that there is a significant change. And so it's an interesting kind of, even I, for myself, I will do this. And it's partly because of the way I was raised. Like I will stay in these kind of clothes that I'm wearing right now until I know we are not going outside. We are done going outside of the house. We have finished eating dinner or whatever else. And then I will shower and then put on clothes that in my mind mentally are just home clothes. These are the clothes I will never wear outside. These are the clothes that are comfortable and nice, but only me and my wife will ever see me wearing these clothes because it's though my mind is entering into a space of we are now in just alone home time. We are not going outside. We're not meeting anyone. No one's coming to the home. It is just us. And so it's like a mini ritual, yet somehow that gives me a sense of transition and space.
Yeah.
What's
and
going
what I
on
like
here?
Good.
Yeah. I mean, what's going on here is Jacob, like it seems to be, he's making it very clear to the family now. We're supposed to be just focusing on Yahweh. So we need to, one, bury these idols, get rid of them. But two, we also need to now move into this new mentality of, well, Dad said we are worshiping Yahweh alone. we have to do something that really marks that moment of, yes, we are doing this now. And that was before, but now this is moving forward.
And the point is, thank you. And the point, both your illustration of your clothing and Jacob here, is God didn't tell them to do this. This is part of their culture. This is what they felt they needed to do. So I'm going to even be thinking, and this is in line with Dr. Heiser, I believe, that when it comes to the rituals of Leviticus even, it's not as though God says, okay, guys, for the first time now, I want you to do this kind of stuff. I think God was working with the culture that everyone had at that time, including foreigners, and that is the idea that when you worship a deity, you cleanse yourself. And so that's why these ideas will come out. So it's a big issue to me because it's going to solve so much of New Testament question about a guy like Cornelius, who Peter would not allow to be in the family of Abraham, even though he was, it said 3 times, he is a righteous man. I think they knew he was right with Yahweh, but they still didn't want him in the church at that time because of uncleanness. So that's a big issue that's going to rear its head throughout the biblical story, but we need to keep moving. Verse 3, this is the completion then of the vow that Jacob made back in 28. Then let us arise, Jacob says, and go up to Bethel. By the way, that word go up, Allah, will be used for the divine being coming up here. So again, doesn't mean you have to physically go up in the air. It just means you travel or you journey. Let us go up to Bethel, and I will make there an altar there to Elohim, the one who answered me in the day of my distress and has been with me in the way which I have gone. There's that kind of hook back to that. If you do this for me, if you give me clothing and food, I'll let you be my patron deity. I think verse 3, 35:3 is the other end of that bookend. He's now saying, this is the God that I'm going to follow. And from here on out, you never see Jacob doubting again. I mean, I'm sure he had his physical situations, and like we all do, we have our bad days, but you don't see in the story or the narrative ever again Jacob wondering which Elohim he's going to follow. Verse 4, so they gave Jacob all the foreign Elohim which were in their hands. That obviously means idols. And all their earrings, very common, but even all the way out to Hosea 2, I think it's verse 13, you have earrings that were part of a worship pattern of foreign deities too, which were in their ears, and Jacob hid them under the terebinth tree, which was by Shechem. Again, cultural idea that has still followed through even to modern Judaism is you don't burn old Torahs, you bury them. There's something about burying a statue or an idol that was part of their culture that is interesting, even followed today, that if it's a holy item, even, I mean, this is weird to me, but this is where Jacob was in his theology. He was still treating these idols as sacred objects. And because, again, in their mind, they had been filled with the presence of a deity. So he buries them. He does not burn them. Verse 5, and they journeyed, and terror of Elohim, and Elohim or Elohim plural, we're not sure, interesting phrase, terror of Elohim was upon the cities that were all around them, and they did not pursue the sons of Jacob. Again, that could be a small g there on God, we're not sure. The terror of Elohim was upon the cities, so maybe an Elohim did this, or God himself, or Yahweh. Again, we're not told. That's one of those moments where you have to hold the capital G, I believe, rather loosely. 6, so Jacob came to Luz, that is Bethel. And again, that should strike in the mind of the reader, hey, we were back there in 28. And which is in the land of Canaan, he and all the people that were with him. And he built an altar there and called the place El Bethel. Again, he may be shortening Elohim to the title El here, and El again is a name of a deity in Canaan later. There's debate as to whether he's borrowing the title. Doesn't matter to me, but he is. We know he's going to worship Yahweh through this. But notice the next phrase is interesting, because there. The Elohim, and it's pretty uncommon to have an article in front of Elohim, but you do have it here, because there the Elohim appeared, and that word in Hebrew is plural. because there the Elohim appeared to him when he fled from the face of his brother. It's referring clearly back to 28 verse 12, and those malachim going up and down the stairway. So it's a good example again where we can triangulate between verses and realize that malachim are Elohim on assignment. This is where those Elohim were going up and down, even though they're called at that time in the story malachim. Evidence again, we don't believe in angels, do we, Mike? We believe in malachim on assignment, or Elohim on assignment.
So, Ron, would you say that then so I'm looking at the ESV, and the way that the translators went about with this was they described it as, to the place El Bethel, because there God had revealed himself. But when you break it up into the actual text underneath, it is Ha Elohim, and it's one verb that is rendered as had revealed himself. So would you suggest that this possibly could be where the gods had revealed themselves? Yes, because
that verb there that you're looking at is plural.
Yeah, and it is plural. So it almost would sense that if it's not the God, like Yahweh God, that it could also be rendered gods or divine beings had revealed themselves to him when he
fled, which I take to be the malachim going up and down.
Yeah.
Now, no version that I'm aware of has a small g there. They all, including ESV, New King James. I looked at them all. Nobody wants to go with gods had appeared to him, because again, that would throw everyone off. I mean, imagine your congregation if you had that in your Bible. They would look up and say, "Pastor, what in the world? Gods appeared to him?" Well, that's what the text says, and we have hid that by putting a capital G on God there, I think. It was one of the recommendations I had to the editor of the new NIV, but
it's funny.
Get through.
There is a note on the second edition of the Net Bible where they acknowledge the Hebrew could be rendered revealed themselves. And though most of the time it is translated as singular, because they believe the reference is back to Yahweh.
Yeah.
But the
thing is, in verse 9,
that way.
Yeah. In verse 9, we're going to have, then God appeared to Jacob again, and there the verb is singular. So if a person wants to say, well, Elohim is a plural noun, including even Trinitarian hints, that's why we can put a plural verb after, God appeared, or, we can have a plural verb that God appeared because he's a plural being. The problem is there's every other occurrence of God appeared is singular. So the question is, why here is it plural? To me, the answer is, we'll look back in the story. There's Elohim going up and down this stairway. So to me, that's referring quite clearly to the Elohim of 28:20 or 28:12. But anyway, again, as I started our podcast, welcome to the Divine Council Worldview, where the things you find aren't in the commentaries usually, and that's what's frustrating. That maybe I shouldn't say frustrating, but that's how it works quite often. Verse 8. Now Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died. She was buried below Bethel under the terebinth tree, so the name of it was called Alon Bakuth. Then Elohim appeared, and there's the singular of Ra'ah, visibled himself, you could almost say. God appeared, Elohim appeared to Jacob again when he had come from Padam Aram and blessed him. So this is a different story now. And that being, whoever's standing in front of Jacob, is going to be, it's up in verse 13, journeying away or going up from him later. So I envision in verse 9 that you have some kind of physical appearance of Elohim in front of him. And verse 10, Elohim said to him, the Elohim standing in front of him said to him, your name is Jacob, Your name shall not be called Jacob anymore, but Israel shall be your name. Now we're mystified by this because back in 32 in that wrestling match, the being that he wrestled told him, in fact, I'm going to turn back to it. Mm-hmm. It's only one page in my Bible. 32:28. He, the being, said, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with beings divine and human and have prevailed. I'm going with the Jerusalem publication or the Jewish Publication Society rendering there. You have struggled with beings divine and human and have prevailed. Now, what I think, here's my call, and again, Mike, give me your opinion, that what you have in 32 was the prediction that his name would someday be changed to Israel, that because between 32 and now 35, he's still called Jacob. But then what happens in 35:10 is that when Elohim, and now I would presume this to be Yahweh, said to him, your name is Jacob, your name shall not be called Jacob anymore. In other words, take that promise made back in 28, and now it comes to fruition. But Israel shall be your name. And so I think from now on, in fact, the last line, I think clinches it for me because it says, so he, the being, Yahweh, I take it to be, called his name Israel. So now you're going to have a very common, it's almost 50-50 between the two, Israel or Jacob. But at this point now in the story, he, Yahweh, says, your name is Israel. Okay, so I take 28 to be the prediction made by a different divine being, and now 28 or 35:10 is Yahweh himself agreeing to this, saying, this is your name.
Well, I mean, we did
I
talk.
could get into some of the grammar, but I'm not going to do it. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, if folks wanted to go into that, they can go back into the past episodes. But you know where I would land on this. I don't take it merely as just a prediction, but that it is the first occurrence of that renaming, but being done by Yahweh, because I think the person was Yahweh that Jacob was wrestling with, who basically just went back and just gave Jacob what he had deserved. You're a trickster. I'm going to pull a trickster trick on you too. The one of the dirtiest wrestling tricks you could ever do. But what I do think, like the way that I would possibly interpret this is that this is because, especially in response to how Jacob followed the instructions, this is really now, yes, I really do want to dedicate. I'm serious now. I'm doing this for real. That, all right, we're making this more official now. And so you shall be called Israel. And that this is going to be consistently how I'll refer to you from now on. The funny thing, though, is that immediately in a few verses later, like in verse 14, it doesn't say Jacob. it doesn't say Israel. It says Jacob.
Yeah. It's going to be 50-50. So
yeah. So like moving forward, the names Jacob and Israel aren't like exclusive. You just start associating that Jacob is becoming more of what he is meant to be, what he is ideally thought of as Israel. Mm-hmm. Right? That there's always this striving to be, yes, I want to be this Israel, this person that is faithful, that is loyal to Yahweh in not just my declared loyalty, but also in how I act, what I do, how I treat others, that it would be a reflection of that. But I do love that even though he says your name will be Israel, it still refers back to Jacob. Yeah. And it just, it doesn't mean anything morally bad has happened. It's just simply, this is the interesting tension of now a person has two names that they are known by, and yet they are still the same person.
Yeah. Verse 11, thank you. And God also said to him, I am El Shaddai. Again, we've heard that name back in 17:1, 28:3. This is the third occurrence now. This will be when Exodus 6 happens and God says to Moses, I was called El Shaddai, but my new name, or my name is Yahweh. This is that term. El Shaddai, coming from the Akkadian word for mountain or mountain range. So high God, you could think of it that way. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and company of nations shall proceed from you. This is the repetition of the promise made to Abraham and Isaac. And kings shall come from your body. The land, verse 12, which I gave Abraham and Isaac, of course, they only were sojourners, they rented, I give to you and your descendants after you, I give this land. The land promise, more than we can get into here, but this is a DCW issue, is how God will, I believe, evolve that story through, well, now and then you get into the Psalms and even into Isaiah and the promise like Psalm 86:9, that all nations will come to us in Jerusalem, that Jerusalem will be the center of the earth when it comes to worship patterns. I mean, physically, that people will come to Jerusalem. And Isaiah 62:12 has that line, or, there's a lot in late Isaiah about coming to Jerusalem, or the idea that in the last days, Jerusalem will be the focal point of Yahweh worship. But then you get to, and here's where the trajectory of an interesting conversation will take us. Let's introduce it now, Mike, if we didn't mention it before. After Genesis, we're going to move into the book of John. We're just going to transport ourselves all the way to the book of John and go through that verse by verse. Mike never got there in his podcast, so I think it'll be a wonderful transition. When we get to John 2, Jesus cleanses the temple, calls it a den of robbers, thieves, murderers. John 4, he's going to tell the woman of Samaria that someday you will not worship God based on the physical location where a person is. And then you get to Romans 12, or verses 1 and 2, where by the time you get to Paul's missionary journey, he's out there in Rome or talking to Roman people, saying basically, you don't need to come to Jerusalem to worship. You can make your body a living sacrifice. It's a reasonable act of worship to simply sacrifice your own body where you are, which of course is metaphorical. So the idea of a land promise, this is my opinion, is one of those trajectories of meaning where God is not breaking his promise. He is adjusting it to meet where people are in the story. And thus, if I'm living in Ephesus in the New Testament, I'm not bound to have to go to Jerusalem now to worship Yahweh. I get to worship him and his Messiah from Ephesus and that kind of thing. So a lot there, but I just throw it out as a interesting divine counsel study to be yet had. Mm-hmm. 13. Then Elohim went up from him, and again, that word can just mean journeyed, so it doesn't have to be floating up in the air, in the place where he talked with him. So Jacob set up a pillar in the place where he talked with him. So he is marking this as a time in his life, kind of that, conversion story that you and I might be familiar with today, where someone gives their life to Jesus. Here is that moment, if you want to mark it down, in our story of Jacob, where he puts a pillar on the ground saying, this is the place now where I have settled, if not resettled, the question of which God I'm going to worship. Mm-hmm. A pillar of stone. He poured a drink offering on it, and he poured oil on it. Again, very cultural. This is a pre-Torah, pre-Leviticus, so we're not finding Jacob with a pocket version of Torah asking himself, how do I do this? This is just something every culture did. And Jacob called the name of the place where God spoke, where Elohim spoke with him, Bethel, the house of God. So Bethel will have this, again, he called it already a portal area, a gate of heaven, where he now makes his final, or not final, but his moment of loyalty very, very clear. Anything before we head on into, I'm just going to summarize the rest of the chapter, but anything else you want to mention about Jacob and his...
I think it's an interesting thing to kind of also remember, right? There, a few weeks ago, I had taught a discipleship class about how we got the Old Testament. And one of the things that I mentioned was about how the editors of the compilations that we have as Old Testament books, they'll make some updates to help their audience understand, especially locations, like from one distance to another, like where are they? And yet it's funny, right? When we read verse 15, we've known this place as Bethel or El Bethel for a while. And yet the way that the verse makes it sound like, oh, this is the first time, or really like the dedication time that it's now known as Bethel. Yet previously, that location has been cited several times, and it's really for the benefit of the audience, right? For them to know, oh, okay, it's happening at that location because in their moment, in their time reading or rehearing the story, they know where Bethel is. Right. It's just that technically it wasn't maybe named Bethel officially until finally this dedication moment.
Yep. And last time I was in Israel, our guide took us to where he thought Bethel was. It's part of a little village now, so it's just an empty mountainside or hillside. But interesting. He explained it very carefully as to where it all fit in the geography of the area, and it seemed to work. So it's someone's backyard right now. The rest of 35, I'm not going to read it, but it's the death of Rachel. She has the 12th of Jacob's boys in verse 18, Benjamin, and son of my right hand. He's named by Jacob. As his wife, beloved wife, Rachel, passes away. She's buried in Bethlehem, which is still marked today. And then in 22, it's just a passing comment because this will have ramifications for later in the story. Reuben, his firstborn, laid with Bilhah, his father's concubine. Bilhah, of course, had already given birth to other boys in the Jacob family, right? And so probably a revolt of some kind in the mind of Reuben about inheritance rights, that kind of thing. Absalom does this as well, and is it 2 Samuel 16. So whatever's going on with Reuben is not good, and it'll come back to haunt him when Jacob is predicting the futures of his boys. He'll mention this, so that's just mentioned in passing in 22. Otherwise, all we have at the end of 35 is the list of Jacob's 12 sons, now that Benjamin is born. And then the death of Isaac. So verse 28, the days of Isaac were 180 years. He dies in 1886 BC, by the way, if we're keeping track of years. When he dies, Jacob will be 180, Jacob will be 120. Isaac will be 180. Joseph will be 29. And I mention him in passing because he's going to be 17 at the beginning of chapter 37, and that means that Isaac will die actually 12 years after 37:2. So the death of Isaac is placed in our Bible here, but chronologically it'll happen after the events of chapter 37 begin. And that's it. So I'm ready to talk quickly about Esau and handle 36, not by reading it. That would be hard because it's a lot of names and places that are hard to pronounce in English, so let's not burden ourselves.
Ron,
let me give you, go ahead. Yeah, Mike.
One thought, and I think we did talk about this probably the last episode we did together, and it was about Rachel, because it was a very interesting thing to kind of realize, especially when Jacob, I'm dedicating myself, yes, I'm focusing on Yahweh, everyone get rid of your foreign gods. Did he know about Rachel before that moment? I've wondered, right? Because Rachel took her father's teraphim, the little household idols, household gods.
Did he unknowingly curse her, as it were? Is there a Jewish tradition about that? I don't know.
It's just so strange, right? Because this is it's within the same chapter, and then Rachel dies, and I the narrator doesn't make any explicit connection. But man, I'm just imagining the moment, right? It's like, yes, I'm dedicating myself now completely to Yahweh. Everyone get rid of your foreign gods. I see what you guys had. And then what if he did not know that Rachel had these, that she just literally kept it like in a seat cushion for all these years?
Yeah.
It's so weird.
It is weird. At the same time, we know that mortality of both children and mothers giving birth is very high, and it would not have been odd for a woman to give birth and die in that sense, in that world. So we don't know.
And then just the thing about Reuben. You mentioned Absalom. I was immediately also thinking about possibly what Ham had done to Noah. Or specifically to Noah's wife. And so there's this thing again, like it's an ancient Near Eastern cultural thing of how do I take advantage of certain liberties that I can have in order to advance my position in the family.
Right.
And boy, that rubs us as moderns in the wrong way.
Yeah. Yep. All right. 36 is all about Esau. And let's just recall the story of Esau very quickly. Back in 27:20, when Jacob wanted to pretend to be Esau, he used that phrase, your Elohim, in front of his father. That's one of the best evidences that Esau was not a Yahwist. You can, re-look at that podcast on 27 to get that story. But when we get to 27:41, that's when Esau says, I'm going to kill my brother as soon as my dad dies. In 28, verses 6 through 9, we have just a passing comment that Esau married women from Canaan. It upset his parents, but there's again good evidence that he's not a Yahwist. He's marrying women who are not worshiping Yahweh. In 32:6, we have Jacob being warned that Esau is coming. Messengers come back to him and say he's coming with a whole group, and it makes Jacob very nervous. But then in 33:4, they meet. Jacob and Esau meet, and it's frankly a stunning moment of tears and nice words, kind words said between two former enemies but twin boys. And then in 33:16, which is the last time we hear of Esau before 36, we just hear he returned that day on his way to Seir. So Esau heads back to his homeland of Edom or Seir, and that picks up then chapter 36, which says, now this is the Toledot, or the story of the genealogy of Esau, who is Edom. There's your cosmic geography. Again, he is a man, but he lives in a territory that is known by him, and that land is Edom. And if we know anything about Israelite history, Edom, it becomes one of the main enemies of the Israelite nation, especially as they pass through Edom on the way into Canaan later. And then as they are the 12 tribes living in Canaan, Edom will be a pain in their side. The book of Obadiah is dedicated to Yahweh's curse upon Edom for what they had done previously to Canaan or to Israel and even their present state. So the story of Edom is a bad taste in the mouth of Israel theologically, cosmically, geographically, the whole thing. So for the writer to put in, or the editors later even to say, Esau is Edom, is to put a very negative brush across the story of Esau, even to the point, I would recommend again, this is the best evidence he is not a Yahwist and never was. He is Edom. Verse 2, Canaan, I'm not going to read a lot here, but just get us into it. Esau took his wives from the daughters of Canaan. There it is. Bingo. And then verse 3, one of them was Ishmael's daughter. We had previously argued that Ishmael was not a Yahwist, and he's even marrying into that family line. And then verse 6 ends by saying he took his wives and so forth, and he went to a country away from the presence of his brother Jacob. So sad time here, but twin boys not just living apart, but probably being enemies even after that rather nice meeting in 33, they become hostile neighbors going forward. And then all you really have from 7 really to the end of the chapter is a list of names and tribes and chieftains and so forth and so on. I copied this in my margin from the Torah commentary, page 238. Following ancient tradition, which saw Esau, the embodiment of evil, these passages have been called a labyrinth, quote, of immoral connections. So Jews don't look at 36 nicely. They see it as a chapter dedicated to the explanation of how Esau became one of the arch enemies of Israel. It's a sad thing when you think about it, because he's the twin brother of Jacob. Interesting name mentioned in verses 12 and 16 is Amalek. We won't do it here, but what happens is, in the story of Amalek, the next time you hear about Amalek, it's in Exodus 17, when out of nowhere, Moses leading the people, or Joshua, it's Moses, leading the people out of Egypt, and they come upon the Amalekites, and the Amalekites and him have a war, Israel, and that's when Aaron and Hur hold up Moses' arms, and if they fall, they go down, and if they hold them up, they win. That whole story is against Amalek, and why God is so upset with them, we're not told, except for that little moment or momentary battle. And then you get these, again, I didn't write it down here, but Amalek just look it up in your commentaries or your concordances. Every now and then, God brings up the Amalekites and says, make sure you wipe them out. Make sure you wipe them out. In fact, Saul, remember when he is told by Samuel to go in and kill the Amalekites, let nothing that breathes remain. And that's when the sheep are bleeding in the background, and Samuel says, what are these sheep I hear? So that's the story again of the Amalekites. For some reason, they really get God's bad side, and he wants them destroyed at any point during the story. And it ends with verse 43. Esau was the father of the Edomites. So best evidence again that Esau is on the other side of the question, the wrong side of the question, which Elohim do you worship? Following then, and I'll close with this, our podcast today, Mike, following through on Esau from here, I won't read them, but you have in Deuteronomy 2, verses 4 and 5, again, Esau is Edom. They're an enemy. Joshua 24:4, he's described as the enemy at the end of Joshua. Jeremiah 49, verses 8 and 10, Esau is named again in this poetic retelling of Israel's story as arch enemies. The book of Obadiah, all dedicated to the curse of Edom. Malachi 1, 2, and 3, that famous passage where it says, Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I, and you're wondering what word to put there in English. Well, the opposite of love, ahav in Hebrew, which is often just a political alliance or a choice of someone when you have two options. The opposite of that word in English, we have decided to put the word hate there, which of course causes a lot of angst, or at least tension, in how can God hate someone? Well, the point of Malachi 1, verses 2 and 3 is that when it came to the choice of Jacob and Esau, God went with one and not the other. And I think, again, that gets into the question of which God they worshiped, mainly. That's quoted, though, importantly in Romans 9:13, when Paul is trying to describe how loyalty works both in the ancient story and also in the New Testament story of which God you worship, that is Jesus or the gods of Rome. That to me is, arguing the same thing. And then Hebrews, the last mention of Esau, the only other real mention of him in the New Testament is Hebrews 12:16, where he's called an adulterer, sexually immoral. I forget the other word put with him, but again, a totally bad dude. And it's not a behavior thing to me. It's, again, not a sinful thing. It's a which God did he worship question that will color his story for the rest of the Bible. I'm done. Anything else you want to add before we close up shop today?
Well, the thought occurred to me as we were going into the latter part of 35 and then into 36. This does feel like if this was a movie, this would be essentially like the fast forward scene. Right, as they're sort of trying to wrap up the story of like, okay, what happens later with these characters that we have been journeying with for this whole entire length of the movie, right? Oh, so this is what happened to Jacob's family. We see the descendants. We see years ahead. And then we see, well, whatever happened to his twin brother?
Yeah, whatever happened to him.
And then we see the progression. It's like a fast forward, not a flashback, but a flash forward. And just to give the audience a general line of trajectory. Oh, okay. So it goes, I didn't expect that. Especially because the throw off is this peaceful moment between them. And it seems like things have been okay. They made up, they cried. Everything seems to be good. They should be now friendly, but something still doesn't jive. And they go on two different trajectories, very different away from one another. And it's sort of just the narrator telegraphing, hey, yes, there was this brief moment, but that was the exception. Something later on, the way that these two develop into the nations that they grow into, they don't mesh well with one another.
And my point at the beginning of the podcast, I'll bring it up here to close, is that even though God, well, listen to Deuteronomy 2, verses 4 and 5. Moses is talking to his people. Command the people, Yahweh, to Moses, saying, you are about to pass through the territory of your brethren, the descendants of Esau, who live in Seir. They will be afraid of you. Therefore, watch yourselves carefully. And I had said remember that when God gives nations to the power or authority of divine beings, it doesn't mean that God's not in ultimate control. Because listen to verse 5. Do not meddle with them, for I will not give you any of their land, no, not so much as one footstep, because I have given Mount Seir to Esau as a possession. It's as though he's saying, remember, I'm going to give you Canaan, and that means, by definition, I'm not giving you the land that I gave to your brother. I've given that to him. That's my call. I'm keeping my call, and I'm going to give you different land. So it's as though the divine or the cosmic geography that we'll be so familiar with later is predicted there in Deuteronomy 2 when Yahweh says, remember, when I gave that land away, I gave it away. That's not yours. So don't pick up pebbles on the way through saying, hey, I'm going to keep a little piece of land here. No, get on through it. I gave that to someone else. And we'll take care of that later. Book of Obadiah will be Yahweh himself coming back on that and cursing the people. But interesting way to end it. All right, I'm ready to go if you are. Thank you, Mike, again for your help. And we'll talk to everyone later and have a wonderful week. See you then.